to our first talk for the spring semester. This is a fabulous talk to kick off our spring semester. And I was telling Stuart that this is actually one of my favorite introductions to do. So Stuart is one of our own. He got his PhD here in 2004 with the esteemed Mike Smith, who's in the back of the room. And the thing that I really loved about Stuart's dissertation work is that for years, people have always said, no one's willing to pay for security, and that's why we don't have secure systems. And Stuart actually set out to measure and quantify that. And I thought that it was a really creative way to do it. If you've never read the work, I actually encourage you to go do it. But the end of the day, if you start paying people to find exploits, you actually start to come up with a way to quantify how much security matters to people and how much they value it. I thought that was really, really interesting. The other thing I really have admired about Stuart's work over the years is that, in my mind, we as computer scientists do our best work when we think about our problems very broadly. And so Stuart has been happy to change fields and interpret his challenges in his area in different ways, and I think that's really admirable. And then finally, the best thing is that he's really, really good at titles for talks. So he has been a regular at Circus. This is at least his third talk here. And I just want to share with you some of the other titles in case you want to look them up. One was Lies, Thievery, and the Ethics of Computer Science Security Experiments. And the other, even more favorite, is Paying People to Buy Vibrators and Lie to Their Spouse's Friends. So on that note, we're going to look for something much more boring, but I'm sure actually equally interesting and exciting. So help me welcome Stuart.
Thank you so much. So today I'm going to be talking about what we call democratic collaboration technology. And this is technology that we've been building in hopes of helping large groups of people write documents so that they can write mission statements, write petitions, large documents where you want to have lots of authors so that you can use it for advocacy and political organization. Which I thought I had left it on. There are two mics. Is this the one? Okay. So that's the last time I'm going to tell the most embarrassing story of my life. Let me get into the talk. I think it's important that alums come back and serve as warnings to others about missteps you can take in your career. In October of 2016, my wife and I left Microsoft Research. We moved to Korea. She took a VP position at Samsung. My kids started at an international school so that they could learn what it was like to live in their mother-in-law land, or my mother-in-law land, I guess their grandmother land. And we continue to have malfunctions here. Sorry about that. And I was trying to figure out what to do with 3 years of my life living in Korea. And so having done a startup back in 2000 in the middle of my PhD, I thought it would be fun to try startups again. So I started consulting for some startups. And having a good time through November and into January, while certain events were happening in the US that I was somewhat distressed about. And in January, I'm trying to figure out what should I do now that I've been consulting for other startups, what should I do on my own? And a friend at the University of Washington told me about this March for Science that was happening and asked if anyone wanted to help organize it. That there was this organizers list and she was looking for people to join. And I thought, well, I have some skills and ideas and I'd love to contribute to that. So I said, okay, I'm kind of far away, but I'd like to do that. I wasn't alone in this. I think there were a few thousand people at the time who had already signed up to be organizers, and by the time a few hours later I was added to the list, there were 50,000. And the next day it was 500,000 people who wanted to help organize this thing, wanted to contribute to it in some way. And so this posed some problem for the original organizers who had created this Facebook group to try to build people to organize this march. They didn't have a mission statement. There had been basically a news article about some people wanting to do it that caused everyone to find out about this. And they suddenly had far more people wanting to help and arguing about the right way to do this than they could possibly use. So they set off and they told people to stop fighting and stop using the Facebook group to have arguments and to be patient, and that they would go spend the weekend and write up a mission statement. And a few core people did that and told the 500,000 people who really wanted to contribute their ideas for what the mission should be, they'd tell them on Monday what the mission should be. And can't really blame them for this. There really wasn't any other way to do it. There wasn't any technology available that would really let them do it and utilize this vast resource that they couldn't use, by which I mean 2 to the 19th brains, right? You've got 500,000 people. This is a lot of computing power that's just sitting idle, and as computer scientists in the room, I'm sure this really offends you. It's like a huge, think of how many racks of people that is. So many of these minds were idle, including mine, and you know what they say about idle minds. So mine started thinking, well, you know, why is it not possible that 500,000 people could write a mission statement? Is that something we could do? Could we build technology for that? To write letters to their elected officials, endorsements, petitions, calls to actions. Think of what you could do if instead of just getting 500,000 people to sign on to something or to march for something, you could collect all of their ideas, all of their desires, put them in one place, and try to construct one thing that represented a consensus of the group. So in looking at existing tools and what they offered and how existing collaboration tools worked, I thought it was helpful. It was very helpful to me to look at the different tools with 2 questions, which is, how do these tools decide who can suggest or propose changes to a document, and who approves those changes? So if you look at, say, wikis are really interesting. You know, Wikipedia mainly scales by dividing and conquering. Things are split up into lots of little places, and then there's actually not that much that's going on at one time on any given document. And so they're able to use this last right wins policy. And when there's a lot of conflict with a given document, then they resort to an existing set of editors and hierarchy that can kick in for the things that are really controversial. Google Docs has 2 modes, one where everyone can just pound on each other's changes and things break. And so if you don't trust everyone else working on it and sort of divide up where you're working on, lots of things can go wrong. But if you really trust 1 or 2 other people and you're going to like all the changes they make, it works pretty well. Google Docs also has this suggestions mode where you can have a few editors who are able to decide which suggestions to take, and a large number of people can submit suggestions. And that scales you a little bit, but you can't have any one person who's going to be able to evaluate 500,000 suggestions in any kind of reasonable time. It helps a little, but it doesn't really scale that much. There was really neat work I got to see when Michael Bernstein came to Microsoft Research to talk about it on Soylent, which is a bunch of technology that came out of MIT and Berkeley and Michigan. And this technology allowed lots of people to work on a document at once. So basically, you'd have someone who'd write a scientific paper, and they'd submit it to the system. And the system would go out and say, OK, it would tell some people, look at this paragraph, see if there's any way to shorten it or improve it. And then some people would make changes, and other people would vote on them. It was a really neat system, but it wasn't really a system that you would use for this type of application, because it was really more like a factory floor for editing, where there's one master process that's using all of the cogs in the factory for different things. So the participants are paid workers, and they're assigned parts of the document to look at or change, or they're assigned changes to vote on. And what's really neat about this work is that it was using voting to figure out from these different workers who may not know much about what's going on in the whole document, or may not individually have great judgment. It was using voting to try to collect their judgment into better judgment, so that you could get the best out of these individuals. So it was really inspiring, great work, but not quite for the application we want. So when I started thinking about how could 500,000 people actually all be authors of a document, first of all, what does that mean? What does it mean to be an author? It's more than just being invited to vote on a tiny piece, or to be allowed to make one change in one specific area. You'd really like to have everyone have the authority to make the changes or propose the changes at least that they see fit, and to have some sense that the resulting document is something they helped come up with. So what we talk about is, our goal is what we call democratic document collaboration. And what we mean by that is two things. First of all, like the Google Docs suggestion mode and like GitHub pull requests, everyone has this ability to propose changes, to submit a change that they think should be made. But unlike those systems, every author also has the opportunity to help decide which changes are going to be made, and they do that by voting. So the process of deciding which changes get into the next version of a document as you go version by version, those decisions are made by the group, by some form of consensus through voting. And so what that voting looks like is this. So, or might look like is this, where you've got a set of changes in a proposal, you review each of the changes, and then you have to make this simple decision of, do I keep this set of changes or do I discard it? So we really want to make this simple, very binary decision really easy. Do I keep and do I discard? And everything we do where we ask people to make a decision is of this form, where they see a change set, and that's all they have to decide. And so our expected user workflow is that users will do the following. They'll be invited to come help, and they'll look at what the latest version is. And then they'll draft and submit proposals to change it if they have any changes they'd like to see. If not, they can just skip straight to voting, and then they can review changes proposed by people and vote on them. And so this process of examining the latest version looks like this. It's just a reader. But you can also check to see what the changes were since the previous version or the version before that, so that you understand how the document has been evolving. The drafting and submitting is, again, something very familiar. It's an editor. It does not look like Google Docs in that you don't see what other people are proposing, or at least not much about what other people are proposing. If lots of people are doing lots of things, it's just distracting and overwhelming. You focus on what you would like to see changed, and then you can submit it. You can take a look at the diff of what it is you're proposing, and then it goes off for other people to vote on and review. Okay, and then there's this process through which you get to vote, which animated here looks like this, where you step through each change. This is really quick, and you pick keep or discard. And then to the right, you see once you've voted, you get to see how people have voted before. Yeah?
Is there any admission control on who gets to vote? Because you can imagine that the internet has people I've heard in popular press referred to as trolls, right? So the trolls show up. And like what I'm thinking about in particular is The Last Jedi, right? So The Last Jedi was this very controversial movie amongst all sort of the big Star Wars fans. So you look on Rotten Tomatoes, and all these user reviews have come out that are very poisonous. And by weight, just if you look at weight, like the number of votes, then you'd think that The Last Jedi is like the worst movie of all time. Right? And so Rotten Tomatoes has this debate over, like, do we want some type of gating to prevent civil attacks and all that kind of stuff. So are you concerned about that in this kind of work? Like, who gets to vote, basically? Anyone who shows up with an email address? Or?
Yeah, so that we're a platform, so we want to support multiple options. You can have things that are totally open. You can have, if you've got a membership and you want to send out codes to members so that only members can participate. Yeah, so if you're worried about the Sybil problem, I'm not quite sure who came up with that name, but it was James and I used to work for the John DeSer, who's the person who came up with the term Sybil attack, which is really what James is asking about. Yeah, so we are concerned about Sybils. In some cases you'll care, and in some cases you may not, and we want to make sure that those options are available. Yeah, Marco.
Is your notion of version global, or is it local to a user?
It is global. So there is currently one version, and you can propose changes to that version, and everyone's proposing changes to the same version. And at some point we'll take some change sets and merge them and create a new version. So some proposals will get merged. But right now we're all on the same version.
Okay, and so then it seems like there's a massive synchronization problem that you want to avoid. So do you sort of...
There is going to be a massive synchronization problem no matter what.
Yeah.
We have to pick our evil massive synchronization problem. Okay. And I'll get to that.
Okay.
But yes, there are inevitably going to be massive synchronization problems. And one of the things you're going to be reviewing and voting on is to resolve conflicts, but I'll get to how we resolve conflicts in more detail later. So this is, when I say this is the expected user workflow, we're not going to force people down this path. We are going to let them examine, we're going to let them go between these 3 tasks at whatever order they like. If they want to stop voting and just say, oh, I want to figure out how did we get here, they can go and look at the latest version and look at the version history. They can then swap back to reviewing and voting, or maybe they review something and they say, that's a neat idea, but I'd do it differently. I'm going to go propose something. The only thing we do because of that massive synchronization problem is that at some point they will not be able to submit proposals. In order to reach a next version, we're going to have to at some point stop submissions so that we can reach a state where we are ready to issue a new version. And so let me get to that, where we can get to a new version released. In order to get to that state, we need to have a set of proposals that are first desirable, right? So one of the things people are going to need to vote on is this change better than just doing nothing? Would we be happier with inaction, just not making the change at all? So for each proposal, we want to figure out, is this better than doing nothing, or should we just, if people think it's better to do nothing, just throw it out? The other thing we need to do is make sure that we have a set of non-conflicting proposals. So we can't accept things that conflict with each other unless we know which one to take or how to resolve that conflict. So we have to make sure we get a subset of the proposals that are desirable, that are preferred to inaction, that are non-conflicting. And so the reason that this requirement here is that sometimes we don't let people submit is imagine what would happen if you could submit constantly. You could have 2 proposals, A and B, that conflict. We're going to hold an election, figure out which one should win, and right when A is about to win, we have a new proposal, C, that's submitted that also conflicts with A. So now we can throw out B, but now we have to hold an election between A and C. And so A is about to beat C, and then someone submits D, and this can go on, and you have starvation, where we never are going to get to a new version. And while this sounds like kind of implausible if we just have these few proposals, if you imagine thousands of proposals, the chance that a new conflict will arise with something that at any given time, it's going to happen. Yeah?
Really like just spatial, like are these 2 revisions on top of each other? Because I think easily imagine situations where if you had 2 prepositional phrases in the same sentence, like near conflict.
Yes. So conflict is not a binary concept. We do at some point assume that things are non-conflicting, say if they're in different paragraphs, but they might still be conflicting, right? It may be that I change. I think we should all be using this one word. And we should use opinion, not fact, and I go through the whole document and I fix that in all the paragraphs, and someone changes it the opposite way. So it's the semantics of what a conflict are not certain. We try to get the most clear cases. We can't get all of the cases. Some of them will just have to come out with another round of revisions. So we sort of have a chain of conflict priorities where we try to get the most severe ones dealt with first, and then the other ones dealt with later. Okay. So we have to have some kind of, at some point we'll have to say we can't accept proposals for a while. So we're going to set a deadline and say, okay, anyone who's working on a proposal better get it in within the next 5 minutes or 30 seconds or what have you. When we don't need to do this until we have at least one proposal that we know is desirable, it's preferred to inaction. Because until we know that there's at least one thing that's desirable, we may never need a new version, right? We may just keep having people propose things, and people may really like the current state of the document. So it may be that we just never need to set a deadline. But once we have something that's preferred to inaction, we have to set a deadline. So the deadline length we're going to choose will be variable. It will be depending on who's currently working on proposals and how much we would just want to get a new version released. So if we've got a lot of people working on proposals and very few people voting, then we're going to give a lot of time left in this deadline. But if we've got nobody working on, if we've got no one working on a proposal, then we can just make the deadline now and say, well, no one's working on anything, so all the proposals that are in, and we're going to vote on them, and then you can start working on a proposal, but you're not going to be able to submit it until the next version. And so that's how we are able to get to the state where, through voting, we can reach this set of non-conflicting proposals that we'll put into the next version. So I've been taking clarifying questions, but just in case there are any on things other than scalability, resolving conflicts, and human factors, which I'm about to get to, if there are any more clarifying questions. OK, great. So scalability. Democracy is not so scalable. So if everyone can submit a proposal and everyone has to vote on every proposal, then our work grows x squared. So the total amount of work that has to be done grows as a function x squared, because if 100 people submit a proposal, everyone's going to have to vote on 100 things. That's 100 people voting on 100 things. That's 10,000 votes required from the system. If you think about 1 million, that's 1 trillion votes. Yeah?
But it seems infeasible that I would vote on every single proposal, particularly if you have massive collaboration. So I guess I don't expect that everybody has to vote on everything.
OK.
So why is that a reasonable assumption?
It's the democratic assumption of it's.
But the democratic assumption is that I have an opportunity to vote, but as we all know from democracies, I don't have to vote.
OK. But even just selecting among which things you'd want to vote on would be quite hard, right? So let's just look at looking at it from an individual perspective, right? The number of, as the group grows, the number of proposals I have to evaluate grows linearly. So just selecting, right? Think about the program committee where you've got 500 papers you're supposed to give feedback on which ones you want to review. Without even reviewing the papers, you still have a lot of work. And right, that's growing linearly. So we need some way to, we can't have a purely democratic, everyone votes on everything system and expect it to scale. So we need some way to sort of expect this curve to slow down, to reach the point where we're going to be able to scale the system and still have people be able to feel like I don't have to review too many things for everything I get to submit. So what we're going to do is we're going to use hypothesis testing to test the hypothesis that the group would support or not support a given proposal. So we don't have to have everyone vote. We just need enough samples so that we know how the group would vote if we were getting everyone to vote. So we'd have two hypotheses. One is the majority will be against the proposal. One is the majority is for. And we use sequential hypothesis testing, where with each vote, we move closer towards one of the hypotheses until we can reach a conclusion that one of them supported. And this can allow us to maybe do it in 20 votes if it's a fairly straightforward thing. Of course, then the neat thing about this is that if we don't know a priori that either one of these hypotheses is more likely than the other, then we're going to use a sequential hypothesis test where the steps both up and down are the same size. And when they're up and down at the same size, it's equivalent to holding an election with a win by whoever leads by X wins, which translates very nicely from statistical theory into design of a voting system. But the problem occurs when the preferences are weak. When the preferences are weak, we care less about the outcome, but we need to do more work to get there, which is the worst possible situation. You're doing more and more work to get to an outcome you care less and less about. Yeah, James?
Aren't there maybe problems with time zones too? So there's vote skew based on time zones, let's say, and then everybody feels very strong in one time zone is asleep. And then there's this race that takes place. It's like East Coast wins.
Yeah. So we're assuming actually this is allowing everyone to collaborate at once, that we're going to just have a 3-hour session where we all go and do some work, and we maybe schedule that at 6 p.m. Eastern, or 6 p.m. Pacific, or at some point where, so yeah, we're assuming simultaneous collaboration rather than having sessions where people work for one day. But you could restructure the system so that it worked in time zones as long as you were able to stage things properly. It would just take a lot longer because of the number of round things. Some things needs to happen.
I think it's not quite that it's simultaneous. I think there's an interesting issue of time scale, which we can know about offline. But the thing is that you are allowing through this window. You're saying there may be seasonality in various things, but the various time scales for those seasonalities don't make a difference with respect to the window of operation that you're looking at. So when we look at a lot of like differential equations and all kinds of the time scale stuff makes a big difference. I know this because my dad's a physicist and does differential equations. Whenever you ask what equations do you use, you start yelling about time scale stuff. So I'll perpetuate the violence of time scale in our one-on-one interview.
Okay. Yeah.
So more generally than the time scale, it seems like the assumption about the sample that you're getting when people come in. So time zones may affect it, but also a strong contingent of Star Wars fans may say, okay, the way this works is we have to get a lead of a certain number of people, so everyone who really disliked The Last Jedi, make sure you click that button as soon as possible. And so then the sample you're getting is not necessarily representative of the population. Is that something that's a concern?
Well, the population is those who are participating. The set of people participating are the authors. Now, there is a question of, can they game the system by everyone saying, oh, let's all go vote on Proposal 13, and so I'll get to that later. So we do want to make sure we address that. So if we have weak preferences, so to get back to this particular question, what do we do with weak preferences? Well, we just say we're only going to allow a certain number of votes. And after that number of votes, we might be wrong, right? It might be that 51% of the general population supports the thing we didn't do. But there's always the next version if you're in a versioning system. So the consequences of making a mistake are lower than when you have to wait 4 years to fix it. And the consequences of doing a lot more work, well, maybe you can come up with a proposal that's going to be more clear-cut next time if you're trying to get something supported. So we cut off the number of votes, and we just make sure it's an odd number so that we can come to a decision and make it. And so we call these micro-elections, you could call them micro-referendums, to be slightly more accurate, but it's harder for people to understand. So through this process, this is how we're minimizing the number of votes needed. Yeah?
So maybe you're going to cover this, but does this actually, I guess something you might want is for a given edit, for edits to converge on a consensus. And it seems like, based on what you described, it's more like we can kind of swing back and forth, around, just like you have two people editing a document, and they disagree on what a given sentence should look like. As a rule, you're going to sit down and have some way of kind of converging on some solution you're both happy with. And it's not obviously by just having a series of majority elections, a majority votes on edits, that you're going to have a way of actually converging on something that people are happy with, rather than just kind of going back and forth between two proposals that roughly half of people hate.
Yeah, so there's a few ways of handling that. One is to change the threshold over time so that you're more open to new ideas at the beginning of the session and you have a higher threshold to pass things towards the end. And that way you can start to deal with that problem. But how exactly what the social dynamics of this are something that we'll only understand experimentally, and we're not at yet. So that indeed could be a problem, but we do have ideas for how to address that. Okay, so resolving conflicts. So when you've got two proposals that conflict, let me just illustrate what that could look like. So we have here two modifications of the phrase a conflict. What's a conflict? Here we've added the word real in both places, and here we've just gotten rid of the words what's a conflict. And the conflict here is that here we've inserted real into a region that this other proposal is deleting. So if we were to take these, presumably I think the correct behavior that we implement is that you'll just get rid of that second section. But someone made a change here that's going to disappear. So this is a conflict. Another conflict would be if there are two insertions in the same place, especially if it's in the middle of a sentence. So here they're both removing what is, so that's not a conflict, but then they're adding different things to replace what is. And so that is a conflict right there. The adding of a real in the second one is not. So If we were to naively implement an algorithm for identifying which proposals have conflicts and just compare all the proposals to each other, that would be n squared as well, and we're trying to avoid these quadratic things. So one of the things we have to do is figure out how are we not going to have this quadratic number of comparisons. And a fairly simple way to do it is to just go through the document linearly, take each proposal and figure out at any given point in the document which of the proposals are in the state where they're deleting something, which of them are in the state where they're inserting something or moving something. And we can then find sets of conflicts where we can pull conflicts out and send them off for voting. When we're trying to figure out how to resolve all these conflicts, it's useful to think of the worst case where everything conflicts with each other. So let's just take a base case with 4 examples. If we're trying to figure out how to resolve 4 proposals that all conflict with each other, we could compare the first 2 with each other, the second 2 with each other, and then take the winners of these comparisons and compare the winners of the comparisons until we get to a point where we don't have conflicts anymore. And so the winner of A versus B could be A, it could be B, or it could be some default way of merging A and B. What's important is that at each stage, we take 2 proposals in and only 1 survives. So if we do that, right, just like any tournament, we're guaranteed this nice property that the number of elections we need to resolve all these conflicts is going to be less than the total number of proposals. And so what that looks like in practice, since not everything conflicts with everything else, is that we have a pool of proposals, and we're going to take 2 out that conflict, find conflicts, take the 2 things that conflict out, and then figure out which wins. And at the same time, we're going to be looking at all the conflicts we can find. So we pull out all the conflicts we can find. When one of them wins, it goes back in the proposal pool. And if it still conflicts with something else, it comes right back out into another election. And that's just going to reduce to a tournament in the worst case. And so we can resolve with that fewer than n elections and end up with some proposal pool that's a set of non-conflicting proposals. Now, the whole proposal selection process needs to both combine the process of figuring out whether proposals are desirable. So are they preferred to this alternative of inaction, and getting to the non-conflicting state. And so when we're trying to figure out whether new proposals are desirable or not, what we've talked about so far is just compare it to the proposal to the original document, and you can find out whether it's preferred to inaction. But we can also take advantage of transitivity. So if we know when E is proposed that A is already preferred to inaction and E and A conflict, then we can just compare E and A, figure out who wins, and if E is preferred to A and A is preferred to inaction, then we can infer that E is preferred to inaction. So we end up with an empty set of new proposals and a set of proposals that are preferred to inaction that are conflict-free, and that's when we can release a new version. And when you factor in both sets of elections that are needed, we're talking 2n elections. OK. Don't see, oh, yeah, Stuart.
It's not clear to me that this way of doing a tournament is order independent. Does it matter what order you pick pairs?
It matters. It does not, in terms of total elections, it's not going to matter. But the ordering, you could end up with an ordering that's slower. The result that you have could matter, which order you pick pairs. So human preference is not necessarily rational, and it's not necessarily consistent. We make the assumption that it's transitive, but it's not going to be perfectly transitive.
No, even if it were transitive, because you're doing this merging thing sometimes, the
right.
merge operation might not be order independent.
The merge operation
might not be order independent. That's a separate issue.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with human.
Right. Yeah. I believe this would be, I'm guessing this would be an NP-hard problem if you were to try to find something that's optimal. That if there is a set of optimal proposals, and you had a preference function, I'm not sure that you be able to have a consistent solution that you would always get to. So there is going to be some arbitrariness to this process. I don't think that's avoidable. Hopefully this is a reasonable form of arbitrariness. But it's hard to say. It would be a really interesting thing to try to figure out what is the optimal process here for avoiding avoiding arbitrariness. Okay, so some human factors issue. First of all, I talked about we want to keep this process of deciding things to simply looking at a diff and saying, would I make the changes, keep or discard? But I also said we should have this option of merging proposals, so that we should have 3 options: proposal A, proposal B, and the merger of the 2. I also didn't say exactly how we do A versus B. So if we're comparing A versus B, what we do is we take the current version, we make the changes in A, and then what we're showing the user is the changes needed to get from the document if A had been implemented versus the document if B had been implemented. Half the time they see the direction of A to B, half the time they see B to A, and that way we try to remove the bias in either direction. But now we're adding this third option, which makes it even more complicated. Given that we really do want to keep it to just keep or discard. We want to make it this simple every time we ask the users to make a decision. So to present a third option, we first ask A or B, and we get their preference, and we tally those up. So here, if we have to choose between A and B, A is the winner. But then, after they've chosen A or B, we say, OK, now here, take a comparison between the document with A implemented and the document with our default way of merging A and B. And is that something, would you take the merge, or would you just stick with your original decision? And we count up how many people choose merge in both of these cases and put the tally there. If a majority of people, if more people choose merge than either of the other 2 options, we merge. If not, we choose the one they preferred more. So with that mechanism, we can keep using a binary decision and that really simple experience for something that's really much more complicated of A, B, or merge. There's this another issue for the user experience is what do we do with people who are in the middle of proposing something, and then we don't let them submit because the deadline's expired. And now a new version's come out, and they've made changes to something where the underlying version's going to change underneath them. So they were editing, and then this text they were editing changed while they were editing it. And so what we do there is they are going to lose some of their changes. If they deleted something and it was already deleted, it's going to disappear. If they were restyling something that no longer exists, that's going to disappear. Moving text that no longer exists, not going to happen. But anytime, the rule we follow is anything that they've done that composes new text, any new text they've composed, we keep. So if they put a new sentence into a paragraph that got deleted, we're going to leave that sentence there. It's going to look out of place. They're going to see it. They're going to see it's out of place. But they're not going to lose text they composed. So they can go back and look at the context of the document and keep all of the text that they composed and figure out how they want to reintegrate it now that there's a new version. Another human, oh yeah.
Do you sort of mark it as some unusual sentence that maybe like other participants should be able to merge and check out or something?
Well, other participants won't see it because they haven't submitted the proposal yet. And they're going to...
Is there any way to, like, once it's worked into, I guess if there's some extra, like, we're
they're going to get to put it in context before they make the proposal. Okay. So it's the job of the person submitting to figure out. They're still working on their proposal. So we want to make sure we leave everything. We want to leave them in a state where they can continue their work as best as possible. So yeah, people don't see it to vote on it until they've figured out how to resolve all those changes. And they can get back to a state where they're just like, no, I don't want to take any of the changes. I'm just going to leave my proposal in place and let the whole version get reversed and go in my direction. They can do that as well, but we want to get them to a state where it's sort of the cleanest, simplest way to adapt to the new version and still keep as much as what they've done as possible. Okay, the next issue is trying to make sure people feel valued even as the group grows, because the larger the group gets, the smaller a fractional impact you're going to have. And so what we do, and this actually is not a great example of it, but I didn't have a good example to throw in time, is that whenever a new version is released, we show them what their contribution is. So this is the number of words you put in, this is the number of blocks you've moved, this is the number of words you deleted, and we do the same thing, which we're not showing here, for everything that you voted for. So if you voted for a proposal at anywhere in the process, that proposal makes it in, then you get to feel that you helped contribute by voting for those words. So you know, okay, in this version, maybe none of my proposals made it in, but 58 of the words that I liked are now in the document. So I can feel good about having contributed, even if I'm not proposing any new language. Yeah?
You also tell them how many times I voted against something and if you did, right? Because that's also a contribution. So I have to stupid stuff.
Not right now. It's, yeah.
As Val, I would that's probably added valuable contribution.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, we'll think more about that. I think voter biases have come up a number of times already. So, right, people are going to be biased for things they've proposed, right? I'm going to want to vote on my proposals. I may want to vote on my friends' proposals, and my friends may tell me, go vote on my proposal. I may want to vote to conform with, I may be a conformist who votes along with how other people vote, or I may be an anti-conformist who likes to vote against people. And I may just be biased for or against change itself. I may think the document's great and I just want to vote to reject everything, or I may think the document's terrible and I may just feel like I want to support everyone who proposed a change by voting for them. So there are going to be these biases. One of the things we do to fight biases is that we're assigning elections to users. So you don't go in and say, I want to vote on proposal 13. You say, I'm ready to help contribute and vote, and we assign you proposals to vote on at random, or elections to vote on at random. So proposal versus proposal, or proposal versus inaction. And so you don't have a say in which of the things you get to vote on. They're assigned to you. And yeah, we could as things grow, think about making people sort of experts in part of the document, and having other manipulations to this. But right now, it's just purely random. So when you go and you vote, you're voting on something that is being assigned to you. But if you look at this interface here, where it says keep changes in 2.3, that's the last thing you voted on. Where it says keep changes in proposal at the very top, that is what you're voting on right now. So you don't see what proposal number it is. You don't see who wrote it. You don't see how many other people have voted for it or against it. We don't provide any of that information until you vote. And once you vote, you can't change your vote. So in order to try to keep people from their own biases, we are removing information that might bias people until they've had a chance, until they've committed to their vote. So yeah, that's all you see. You don't see any of that information that might bias you. I think there was talk about preference being correlated with voting speed. This isn't so much of a problem in the common case because we start by soliciting a small number of votes at a time so that we know when we've come to a consensus while using the minimum number of votes. But if you think about this process, we could end up at a situation at the end where there's only one conflict left. Everyone wants to vote, and so we have 100,000 people voting on one thing, and we don't want the first 10 clicks to decide what the outcome is. So for there, we have to ensure that a minimum fraction of people have voted before we make the decision. And that we're hoping is sufficient to take care of that problem. We could also, if it turned out to be more of a problem, also look at correlation with time and even further extend the fraction who need to vote if there is a correlation with time. Just to cover some other design decisions that people tend to ask about. One is, people have asked, well, do you provide any way to vote on abstract ideas? Like, I'd like to take the document in this direction or the other direction, and can't we vote on that? And we've made an explicit decision, no. We might go that way. We haven't ruled it out, but why give people more things to argue about? And the way we've designed our text editor, there's only one font. You can't choose Comic Sans MS. I'm sorry, James. You can choose italics or boldface. We don't have superscript. We don't have subscript. We don't have lots of styling options. We really want sort of very LaTeX styly. You should be focusing on the text of the document, not on the styling. So things can get reformatted later. You don't want hundreds of people voting on how a document should be styled. Should we support peer-to-peer chat? Google supports it. Lots of other people support it. Maybe. We're going to see how people use the system. There are plenty of chat options out there for people to use. It's nice to have something that's closely integrated. If lots of people are using chat with this, then we could look at how to do that right, but we're not doing it now. Feedback on proposals. This gets to trolling. In some ways, it would be really useful to have feedback on proposals. Oh, I really liked your proposal. 9 out of 10 changes were good, but there was this awful word or there was this typo, and just go fix that, and I would be happily voting for it. Or if you could just do something slightly different. We'd love to support constructive feedback. If you provide a means of constructive feedback, there is, of course, the possibility people will try to use it for trolling. So our current thinking on that is we would like to provide this feature, and the workflow will be that you can submit your feedback on a proposal. It will then go to one of the later people who have yet to vote on it yet to see whether they think this was good feedback. And if they think it was good feedback, then the author of the proposal will see it. So that if you're a troll and you want to say something nasty to the person who wrote the proposal, your feedback is going to go to someone who's just randomly assigned, who will see that it's trolling, mark it as trolling, and the troll will have been trolled. They'll have their nasty stuff will have been thrown away and their work will have been wasted, and they'll feel discouraged instead of the person who wrote the original proposal. But getting this right is going to be a little tricky, so it's something we're still working on. I guess a question I'm often asked is, well, if there are 10 changes in a proposal, could I vote for 9 out of 10? Among computer scientists, so you quickly see how the number of options there would explode, and not all of them would be grammatically correct, and it's just better to find a way to provide feedback or something so that people can fix it for next time. Can we make it easier to revise and resubmit proposals? Yep, that's a key flow. Could we allow authors to choose how proposals are merged? Possibly when there are only 2 options, but we don't want to have that 2 to the C problem again. So we have to be careful about that. So we're not doing that initially, and we'll look into that. Okay. Let me close by talking about uses, applications for social science. Among the things you could use this for, if you're trying to do social science experiments, is especially if we allow you to adjust for certain proposals, how many votes can you get, how many votes we'll be getting. You could use it to test language, like are people more likely to vote for things if you're using the word inheritance tax versus estate tax, or extreme inheritance tax. And what's interesting about this, I think from a social science perspective, is that it's very different than taking a survey. When you go and you take a survey, people know they're being surveyed, and so they're in a mindset of thinking, well, how's this survey going to be used, and how do I want to sound, what do I want the person calling me to think about me, and so on and so forth. Here, it's integrated into an existing workflow where you're giving preferences for other reasons. So you might get different results. Might be worse results, might be better results, but it would be really interesting to see how this differs and whether it's useful for validating other ways of testing hypotheses like this. It would be really interesting to see how statistics change based on all sorts of demographic information if you're testing if we can get demographic information for the participants and allow setups where you can test how language changes and language preferences for demographics. There's lots of interesting statistical hypotheses we could test. And then hypotheses, I think part of what's driving this whole project is this hypothesis about political engagement. That right now when you're asked to engage politically, it's usually, well, the technology of political engagement seems to be focused more and more on reducing the amount of thought you need to put into political engagement. It's, here, call your senator and here's the script you can read. Just go online and write your name on this petition so that we can add this number can be one higher, and we can collect your email address so that we can ask you for donations later. It's more and more designed to remove thought, which means people who want to engage thoughtfully, just their voices are being drowned out by this automated process designed to drive traffic. So when you're thinking, do I want to meaningfully engage, you know that your voice is just more and more being drowned out by this large amount of automated traffic that existing tools are generating. So our hypothesis is, maybe people will engage more. Maybe there's a group of people who will engage more if they're actually given voice into what an organization's message is, rather than just being asked to echo that message. And if people like to engage that way and they feel that now an advocacy organization is advocating for their message rather than that they're echoing the organization's message, or that a political party is working to further their agenda rather than that they're being asked to further the political party's agenda, that this will change how people donate, how much they volunteer, and how much they vote. And so that's really the motivating hypothesis behind what we're doing. And so with that, I'll take more questions. Margot again. Oh.
So you presented us a design that I am assuming you arrived at through some amount of experimentation. And I wonder if you can share like some of the things you tried that ultimately you didn't do because reasons.
Yeah, we haven't done enough experimentation yet for me to feel confident about that. But in terms of design evolutions as we've gone on, one of the things we really originally wanted to do was that when you were looking to see whether a proposal is preferred to an action, half the time you would see the proposal, the process of diffing from the original to the proposal, and half the time you would see it back, just like we're doing with half the time you see A to B and half of the time you see B to A. And we decided not to do that because, first of all, it would take away a sense of users knowing what was in the current version. It's helpful for users to have a sense of place and to know what that current version is. And if half the time we're messing with them and telling them it's not what it really is, that could be problematic. It was really elegant scientifically to know that you'd automatically remove the bias in favor of change or against change. But we were concerned about that. We were also thinking forward to people really wanted to be able to give feedback.
Yeah.
And people, one of the features I didn't mention that we're thinking about is people want to be able to say, hey, there's a reason for this proposal. We're changing this language because, or you should realize that this needs to happen for this reason. And if you allow people to attach reasons to proposals, you can't automatically create the backwards reason of why you would undo it.
Or you might end up with weird things.
Yeah.
So within a proposal, there are several different changes.
Yes.
You don't have to vote for each of them. You can leave some.
You're not allowed to vote for the changes. You have to vote for the proposal. You take the set or you leave the set as a bundle, because otherwise there would just be, it would be, and true to the C.
There's one vote you have.
It's one vote for the set of changes in a proposal. Yeah. Mike, you had a question?
Yeah. So. I don't know how much of the system you have built, but have you thought about demonstrating the power of it? How would you show that this versus, an Uber editor on a Google Doc, you get a better outcome than they would have gotten?
So the first question, Hold on. Bring up the browser. So, well, while I don't answer the second question, right, so the first question is how far is it along in development? And the second question was?
How are you going to demonstrate the power of this approach versus what we have today?
Well, people are familiar with what they have today, so with what we have today. So, oh, I don't have internet. I was going to do a demo. We have people who want to try it and use it for things that they can't do today with the existing technology. So we have people at state level political parties and who are working within companies and need to be able to collaborate and have found it challenging to use existing tools. So in terms of an exact scientific study where we show that this works better than that, we're not planning on that. We're just planning to let the market, if people like it, we'll quickly decide because there will be adoption in the presence of alternatives. And if there's no adoption, then that will answer that question as well. And I'll be on to new problems. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you talked too much about your process for soliciting votes. It seems random, I guess. There's someone who just graduated from here, and she was really focused on in the Google Docs setting, how do you pick the subset of changes that are most relevant to a particular user to review. And
oh, interesting.
At the same time, this would maybe potentially take away some democratic aspects. It's hard to tell how that would work out, but have you thought about any special ways of determining who to solicit votes from? For example, some participants may care more about one section than they care about another.
Right. So letting people pick a section, I think, is a lot of it's a question of scale, right? Once you're at a large enough scale, letting people pick a section is it may still allow you to have sufficient democracy. So now, yeah. Sorry, I'm in such a large font size. There we are. Yeah, there are lots of laptops. There we go. So anyone with a laptop can just go to that URL, sign in with Facebook or Google or Twitter, and start editing this. It will have bugs, but it'll be fun to watch. So while I take more questions, you guys can all troll me and submit and ask me. I'll just watch for the changes that are coming in.
Type.
Yeah.
What do you think about the potential of coalition formation outside of the platform in which people basically agree for some kind of quid pro quo, or they vote for each other's proposals, even if they themselves don't have an opinion on it, but they'll agree so that their own proposals.
Yeah, so the question was about coalition forming, and there's only so much we can do about coalition forming. So if it's a large enough coalition, then likely some of the members of the coalition will be asked to vote on other members of the coalition's proposals. Again, they don't get to choose. They don't know if they know, oh, this is the proposal that has this change at this location. So we try to make it as hard as possible. So they would have to know, you need to vote for the proposal that changes this word in the third paragraph, and you'll do it if I change this word in this paragraph over here. So there's always the possibility of coalitions. People have to first find each other, know who the other people are. They have to find a way to communicate how they're going to recognize the proposals, and then they're going to have to get lucky enough to get or have large enough numbers that there's enough probability of being assigned each other's proposals. So we're doing everything we can to make it harder, but you can't make it impossible.
You have some proposals to vote on?
Or they were already approved. Here we are. We have just one proposal outstanding. 4 people participating, so we're going to need one more vote in before, one more accept vote. New version's updated. Yeah.
Cool.
I expected better trolling from this audience.
Any other questions, or people just want to play with themselves?
Let's think.
It's important to challenge them. Thank you.